Welcome to the Uplift, where we are uplifting our lives, uplifting each other, and uplifting our communities together. Thank you for joining myself, Cy Herrera, and Tessa Cy here, two women, two attorneys, doing it our way, and inviting you here each week to share in on the stories, advice, and life lessons we've picked up along our journeys that keep us uplifted, and that will hopefully do the very same thing for you. Now buckle in and let's get ready to be uplifted. Okay, Tessa, tell me a little bit about your backstory. Maybe start with your childhood.
Well, I think I often hear, especially living in Texas, so many people say, well, I was born and raised in Texas. My backstory is not nearly as simple as I have lived in one place and only know one thing for my entire life. I was born in Belgium to a mother who was a Swedish citizen, a father who was an American citizen, and spent my until school age years essentially in Belgium. Then we moved to the United States and mostly lived in a Swedish household where I spoke Swedish to my mom, and remember my younger brother coming up to me when we were both in elementary school and him telling me, you're in America now, Tessa. Speak American," which didn't make sense to me then because I'm like, I'm older than you, and I've been speaking to our mother in the same native tongue since before you were born. But whatever. I think that kind of fish out of water.
Mm-hmm.
Moving from Belgium to the United States, specifically into Oklahoma and Texas, it was strange to me. I remember thinking to myself, why did you people bring me here? It made no sense to me. And I think it was mostly, you're a kid and you're like, I love my grandparents and now my grandparents are an ocean away. What kind of torture has this created for me? And my grandmother's always been such a role model for me as a child and into my adult years, even now after she's passed away, that it was troubling for me to be that far away, especially before the internet where you could easily FaceTime.
Right.
Anyway, I digress in my story of my life. Then I went to college in Texas, went to law school, met my husband during college, and we ended up in San Francisco, and then ended up in Houston, and then settled in Austin. And it has been a joy knowing that he is from a different culture than my culture, and that has helped me navigate things a lot easier. And I think I see things in multiple perspectives coming from, a Swedish American married to a Mexican American. We don't see things the same way, but it's a very cohesive, how do we meet in the middle? And it's guided me both personally and professionally because of that diversity and understanding that I am not just some born and raised American. I haven't been able to navigate the waters as easily as born and raised Americans have.
Mm-hmm. And why did your parents bring you here?
And my dad's job, it was with an oil company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the oil company was, based in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So here you end up when it's, when the breadwinner has the job.
Mm-hmm. And what was it like going from, because you were already in school, like you said, what was it like going from Swedish schools to American schools? Was that a special experience?
So I started schools in the United States. I remember vividly, walking through the halls of the elementary school in clogs and the noise rattling. And here comes this blonde girl with two long pigtails that are braided and her wooden soled shoes. I vividly remember this thinking, this is weird. This is really strange.
Oh my God, I love that image of you with little baby Tessa in her little clogs. Oh my gosh.
I think it also made me defiant, right? I think when you are an outsider, being an immigrant is, and knowing multiple languages, especially as a kid, kids are mean to each other.
Yeah.
And when you show up knowing multiple languages and wear wooden shoes, you can either choose to lean into it or you can choose to adapt. And let's just say I did not choose to adapt and or conform, I should say, not adapt, conform. I did not choose conforming.
Did your brother, I wonder, like, were you all very different in that tactic?
Oh, he is definitely a conformist. Like, I mean, I'm assuming that's why he told me to start speaking quote unquote
Right,
American.
right,
When I'm
right.
sure 5-year-old him didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, yeah. So, what were your special challenges growing up? Just being defiant, really. If you're not a conformist, you're defiant in that way. So, what was that like? Was it a special challenge being who you are, just trying to be your authentic self in this new space?
Looking back on it, I think I did not have like a core group of friends, but I had some core friends, but it wasn't like a clique that I belonged to. And I think it was because of that, you know, immigrant status and growing up in a household that even though you're in the United States is very much in tune with one culture and
Mm-hmm.
not even letting in other cultures. I mean, it's very much a stronghold when Scandinavians are involved. Like all the family friends were Scandinavians.
Mm.
I think I learned to adapt to multiple groups more easily. Like I understood what I needed to do to get along with, say, the cool people, and I understood what I needed to do to get along with the academics, and I understood what I needed to do to get along with the athletes.
Yeah.
And I never allowed myself to be defined by a group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I like that flexibility that it gave me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that for sure. Um, you talked about how your husband is Mexican American, and I wonder, like, do you see parallels in, that same experience that you had in his experience?
I think his experience, I, I don't want to speak for him, but I feel like um, mainstream society was much harder on him and his culture than mainstream society is on
Mm.
my privilege of not looking different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm blonde and blue eyed, but I look like I can fit in.
Yeah.
He doesn't have that same privilege. And that
Right.
I think is much harder and unfortunate part of society.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And what was college like for you, the college experience? And also I'm curious, like, did you have, I know you were so young, but I mean, your grandparents were still, like you said, across the ocean. Were there other people that you had there that, I don't know, would influence your perspective as you were going through these different stages in your life, like being in America versus being there, and like what your life maybe would have been like, or how it would have been different had you stayed there? Do you have that?
So my mom is one of 7 kids.
Mm,
4 of them came to the United States, and 3 of them stayed in Sweden.
mm,
And when we would visit my aunts and uncles in the United States and my cousins, I think I had that experience talk with them about it. I know my aunts were very concerned about how I was adapting because I think I was probably the most Swedish of all the cousins that were not living in Sweden.
mm,
And I just remember as a kid, like we would visit every, say, year and a half my grandparents, and I would come equipped with a list of questions that I needed answered by them. Like I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want to know. Like there were things that I needed to know, and I was
mm.
only going to get them answered by my grandmother.
Interesting.
And then some of them were really defiant little things. Like, I remember first trip back and I was like, I needed to learn how to curl my own hair. I needed to learn how to braid my own hair. I mean, no little kid needs to know how to do this on their own. Like,
Yeah.
do you want a 7-year-old to be operating a curling iron? Probably not. But that's what I needed to know. And like, I needed to know how to make my own lunch. I needed to know how to make oatmeal. And like, I had a
Wow.
list and I was
Oh,
ready to
wow.
go. But
Yeah.
I was also very defiant. There's a story that my parents sometimes tell about me that I think really defines me up until this day. I was 2 and I was put in the care of a babysitter in Brussels. The babysitter was like a 17, 18-year-old, and I think I was technically under the care of her mom because my mom was pregnant with my brother. The babysitter left her teenage daughter in charge of me while she went to run an errand like an adult would, and I found an opportunity to escape, and I did. So
Oh, wow.
I remember trying to figure out how to reach the doorknob. And then I just walked multiple blocks through Brussels to get to our house and knock on the door. And apparently, I talked to the neighbor in French because at that time, living in Brussels, I knew enough French to talk to neighbors. And from being out in society, I was speaking Swedish to my mom and English to my father. And so here I am, a little 2-year-old walking around Brussels for a couple blocks, just defiant as ever. I'm going to escape the babysitter, and I wanted to go home, so I decided to walk myself home. And I think that's pretty true to me today, right? Like, I don't think the way things should be are is correct. Like, I think you should always question and do what's right for you. And apparently, I started when I was 2, and it hasn't changed.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so in general, it sounds like you were able to just keep your sense of self no matter what continent you were on.
Yeah, and I don't think it was related to outside forces. Like, I think it was just intrinsic in me, not allowing what other people said to bother me.
You talked about your grandma. Do you think that some of that came from her?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
She was a force, but also very polite, always dressed to the nines. And there's a great story of her when my grandfather was trying to court her and she was not interested. She owned a cafe in like the 19 teens in Sweden. He was a patron. She thought he was too much of a ruffian. He ordered coffee, and because she was so offended by him, she brought him tea. And that was her way of just like telling him no. And that's kind of little acts of defiance that don't necessarily anger other people, but enough to make them think. I think I learned those tactics from her because she was a queen at it. Like, it's never going to be overly offensive, but it's going to be just enough to make you question what's going on around you. And that's what she was really gifted at.
I love that. My grandma definitely also taught me how to be defiant, but she wasn't so subtle as I would say. but she did admire me, which means everything to me. That she always would say, like, I like her. She can win an argument without ever even breaking a sweat. Like, she kills them with kindness, type of thing. And so I liked that I had her approval for that because it meant, I was being effective like her. So
tell me your childhood story and what your first memories of your grandmother are doing these things.
Oh, wow. Well, my childhood started in Ohio. So I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. And, Toledo is just one of those Rust Belt towns, like a lot of Rust Belt towns in that area, just south of Detroit. And, we grew up kind of dealing with poverty in a sense, instability in a sense, but also just a big loving family. Also just a lot of interesting different opportunities to see how people live their lives. So, speaking of my grandparents, they were business owners, and that was a big part of our lives. They owned and operated really like a Mexican nightclub of sorts, and it was something that was kind of at the center of a lot of what we did. It's where we had our family gatherings. It's where people played music, and it was this cultural tie to something that was really far away for us. I mean, my grandparents were born in Texas. Actually, they were born in San Antonio, and they moved up north when there were factory jobs, and from there it's like you have to work to keep your culture in this. I mean, we're in Ohio. It's not the same as Texas, right? And so
what do you think about that? How did that shape you working to keep your culture? It's something that is very familiar to me, but I would love to hear your experience with trying to keep your culture in a country that drowns your culture out.
Yeah, I think it's always a really interesting struggle. I mean, I think we share this experience of, being in a place that is not your home. It really isn't. Like even though I was born in Ohio, I never felt like, oh, these are my people. This is where I'm from. You know what I mean? It just was like, this is where we live. And the prominent culture is very different than our subculture. And for me, it was definitely an identity, cornerstone. For me, it helped me make sense of why I felt different in this place, and it made it okay because it helped me understand kind of the duality of it all. I mean, I'm absolutely American through and through. I've never lived anywhere else, and when I was growing up, it was like I knew like from a young age that like this was an important thing. And I think it was partly because the people around me, like my family, they I don't know that they worked hard at doing it. It was just like they valued it. They valued it and I could see it. Like my grandparents made this place just so that our community could have a place to celebrate our culture. Like that's the way that I see it. And yeah, it was a nightclub. It was a place where they, had a business, but they never made tons of money. It was just, a thing that they love to do. It sustained them. And it was a place that like we could have the music that we like and we could dance the way we like and we could, just speak the way we like. And it was just amazing to have a group of people that just love these common things that are not mainstream. And so for me, it was definitely something that like, I don't know how to explain it, to be honest. I feel like it was something that helped me feel like I had a connection to my authentic self as I was living this American life, and it's just strange because like I said, I identify as American, and at the same time, I identify as Mexican. I mean, it's just very much the duality of the reality is that you have both of these sides, and you're both. It's not like some people think of it as you're more Americanized, or you're more this, or you're more that. And for me, it's like I'm fully both. That's how I think about it. Like when I see people on the other side of this line that has been created at our southern border, I just think like those are my people. They were the same people. We're like literally the same people, but I just had this experience growing up and they had a different experience growing up. And so to me it's so important to keep that in mind because you could easily lose everything that, maybe that you relate to without that. So that was a huge part of my childhood for sure.
Do you
Yeah.
think that duality has helped with your decision making and how you handle situations from your childhood and on? Has it been a
Yeah.
benefit to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that having that helps you understand that there is that for everybody else too, right? Like, I don't just relate to Mexicans and Mexican American people, but I can relate to other cultures, other people that have had a different experience. And I think that it's because you have that perspective of, okay, this was hard for me. this was a challenge in a sense, or this was really enriching for me to have this cultural element, right? And knowing one struggle is like knowing other struggles when you learn about them. And I've always been fascinated by that. So I think some of the milestones in my life too in education, interestingly enough, was that, I didn't get to learn about my culture in school. That reflecting on that now is really interesting to me because I think it's pretty sad. But that was never a thing. Like we weren't learning about Mexican culture in Ohio. That was not a thing. But we did learn some about very limited amount about the history of Black Americans and African Americans in this country, and of course we learned about slavery and some civil rights stuff and different things like that. And I found myself being very drawn to that because I realized like, oh, here's the people that were in a struggle, still in a struggle, obviously, but it was something that I related to where I was like, no one else is talking we're not talking about anything else like this, like everything else that we're talking about is just, this is how America was formed. This is how we do things. And, the history of how we got here was very, in my mind, told from a certain perspective. But then when you talk about things like slavery and this whole other realm of someone else's perspective, because I mean, obviously you can talk about slavery and other historical events like that in one perspective, but it just forces the conversation somewhere else when you're talking about such atrocities, something that obviously impacted one group of people based on skin color or identity in some way. And so to me, that opened up a whole new can of worms in my mind. Like that was a huge turning point for me. Like I remember literally laying on the floor in one of my classes because I had an incredible teacher who wanted us to experience, just as a mind exercise, as a little small physical exercise of what it felt like to be in this tiny space that was a slave ship. And, I think it's interesting that stands out to me, and it shows how like just doing something outside of the norm can stick with people. And it still sticks with me today, because it was a point in my time of life where I realized, there are all kinds of stories, there are all kinds of struggles, and it almost validated the ones that I had already witnessed with the people that I know and the people in my community, seeing how they struggle. And it just started opening up that window for me where I was like, okay, there's something here. And then I built on that, throughout my education, where I learned so much. So yeah, really interesting place to grow up, actually.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
I had a similar educational experience in Oklahoma that, I don't think a lot of people would think, oh, you had a great educational experience in Oklahoma, but I did in high school, because it was in Native America, and my best friend was Native American, and I was able to understand, a culture that has been forced into really bad situations by the government.
Yeah.
And has been able to find its way to thrive and regain some power for itself. But it has never been easy. But it's nice to see that that culture was able to stay intact and still is intact.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
When there's, as you point out, so many forces around you trying to tear down your culture because of it having those other forces having louder voices, right? When your culture is not as big and not as prolific in a country.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is, that was definitely formative in my childhood. I mean, I will say that where I grew up, we had some diversity, which was nice. But surprisingly, actually, we didn't have a lot of actual Mexican people, or like, even though we had like, these small cultural centers, it was the only time really where I felt like I was with, my people. Like in school, I didn't have that. I had a group of friends that was diverse, very diverse, but I was always attracted to, making friends with the people that were different, that were not mainstream, because I felt different, right? And and it's just so interesting the way that happens, the way that you relate to each other. And so, yeah, I think that embracing your culture, it does open up a lot of things. And like, I've seen the opposite too. Like, I've seen other people who, very intentionally reject their ethnic culture, in order to, for lack of a better term, just to assimilate, and to be part of that mainstream. And I find that very, very intriguing, because, what I've come out with in my life is that I can operate in both worlds, in all worlds, with all people. And I think that's a beautiful part of America, but it's also a place that you have to get to as an individual. It's not something that comes as a given because you live in America. It's something that you have to come to as an individual, where you have embraced your true authentic self, and you've been able to embrace the true authentic self of everyone, and accept them as whole people, and not as just this slice of, acceptable mainstream Americana.
I don't know if you share the same experience. I have found that it influences my view on a lot of issues in modern day and how I view society, like especially when it comes to gender and gender identity. Because when you are a strong CIS female and you're in a, say, subculture and you're trying to maintain it, you have that inner strength that is categorized by some as you're difficult, or you're a witch with a bee, or you're argumentative, just because you have a strong sense of self and you know what your opinions are and you understand who you are and how that can impact society.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And tying that to what you asked about my grandma, she is my strength in that regard. I've always been opinionated. I think I became a lawyer because people told me early on that I was like a lawyer. And, the reason I mentioned my grandma there is because she was just that. She was one of these people who was, again, like you said, a force to be reckoned with. And I mean, the reason why it's so astounding is that, she grew up in that same era so long ago, where it's like, this was not, I'm sure this was not, this was probably frowned upon. This was probably not the ideal of what a woman should act like or what have you. And I love that about her, because she, defied all of the stereotypes. And it was really just that she felt secure in herself and her thoughts and her stances, that she would assert them. And people probably thought those same things about her, but she did not care. And that was the most revolutionary thing in my mind. It was a revelation to me to see a woman who was so strong-willed, so strong-opinioned, and so assertive. And she didn't have to, be aggressive or be harmful to anybody. She just was like, this is me, and take it or leave it. And that's it. And I just thought, like, wow. I really, really would look up to her in that way. And, I was a very sensitive soul when I was young. Maybe I still am. But it was like going to her and telling her all the things that were going on. And she would just change my perspective, like 180. She would just be like, why do you care about what those people think, or whatever she would say, where she's just like, forget them, do this, and I would just be like, oh, like, I can think like that. And looking back on it today, it's really interesting, because it makes me think, like, what scripts did I have in my head where I thought, this is what I have to do? I have to accept this. I have to please these people. Like, where did all of that come from? That comes from all of these societal sources that you can't even pinpoint. Those are just messages that you're being sent as a young woman all the time. And then to just have somebody, tell you the opposite and show you what that looks like is just something that you cannot, you can't replace. It's just something that is so special. And so I'm so grateful to have that. And I just hope that everybody has somebody like that in their lives. And if they don't, that, maybe we can pass on that strength through this.
I hope we can too. I like to think that our diverse experiences and our understanding of what it's like to be an outsider and the need to have that personal kind of strength can help other people understand that it's okay to have these strengths, because even when society is telling you you should not.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be, and maybe society's improved so they're not overtly telling people they shouldn't be doing things, but there are so many like undercurrents that are just built into society, like something as simple as dress codes that are always targeted toward mostly women.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we could have a whole episode about dress codes. Come on. And not even dress codes, but like literally just like, I mean, in the workplace, in schools too, but I mean, just being judged and I mean, even over sexualized for what you wear. So many things. There's so many layers to it. And I think that, you know, what you just said about it not being overt is actually why we need to talk about it even more. Because, you know, when it was overt, I think that people created certain coping mechanisms where they're just like, this is how we deal with this today. This is what we can do. When it's not overt, I think it's so much harder because, or maybe not harder, but it's very different in that you have to now identify that this is the thing that is happening. And now you have to figure out how you're going to respond to it, because if you don't even understand that it's happening, then you're actually just being manipulated.
And what's worse is when we do it to ourselves, right?
Absolutely,
like,
yes.
We think that we shouldn't be speaking up, or we think that, we haven't been here long enough, so we couldn't have an opinion. And the limits that we place on ourselves are so dangerous.
Absolutely. And the most dangerous, I would argue. Absolutely. And so, you know, for my little story, you know, like I said, grew up in this part of the world that was very much like a factory town. But I kind of grew up also to the point where it became like a post-industrial era where, you know, nothing good has replaced it, but the factories kind of have abandoned the community. I've seen a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of, you know, disability, a lot of mental health crises in my community, a lot of desperation. And I think that obviously is hugely influential on who I am today. Like today, I consider myself a health advocate. I went to law school because I seen literally, you know, people in my community that just had zero access to the legal system. And I would get so indignant about it because I was like a lawyer type. I'm just like, that's not fair, you know, and all the justice stuff, right? And so that was just who I was. But then I thought, you know, I could do something about this. Like I can get good grades, I can pass tests, and I could go to school and get this thing called a law degree and a law license. And then I would be your lawyer and I could just do it. You know, I could just do it for you. And you wouldn't have to be begging these lawyers to take your case or, you know, to work with you on money and all that. So that's why I ended up going to law school in the long term. Very short nutshell of my story. That's how I ended up there. And, you know, from law school, I just learned really how you can collaborate with people to do the most good for communities. And that's what I'm trying to do today. And today, you know, I'm working in a nonprofit organization at the head, trying to find ways to, you know, really get at those things that keep people from being healthy and being whole and becoming their whole self-actualized people. Like for me, culture is one of those things that I feel like is worth fighting for, you know. And when you see people struggling just to survive, they can't really be their whole full selves. They can't really celebrate their full culture or just actualize, you know, to who they want to be in their lives when they're struggling with these basic needs. And so, you know, that's why I chose to be in the public interest realm in this public service space of nonprofit work, because I believe that these are the organizations that are really going to change things for folks, that are changing things for folks on the day-to-day basis. And I think it's an amazing thing for people to just come together and change things, make people's lives better with them. And so that's kind of the long and short of it. I was able to, you know, get through law school by some miracle, not knowing anyone else that has ever graduated from graduate school in any regard. I was the first person in my immediate family just to graduate from college. And I remember like getting college applications and thinking like, you know, from big schools, like, I don't know why they're sending these to me. They must send them to everybody. And I didn't even apply to some of these big schools that I could have gone to. I mean, I just never knew, you know, what was available to me if I believed in myself. And so that's another thing I really want is for anyone that's hearing this to understand that most of the limits in life are self-imposed, like you talked about. And if you really, just believe that you're worthy, then you are.
Yeah, and I think it's oftentimes so much easier when you have a support system like your grandmother or my grandmother who was able to tell you that you can, and that just because it's been a different way doesn't mean it should be that way, and to allow you to understand different perspectives. But not everyone has those
Right.
positive reinforcements, and that makes it harder. And they should have somebody that can help them see that the limits they place on themselves doesn't help them, even though they think that's the way it should be.
Exactly. And question everything.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah. I mean, a new part of my life is my daughter. And the one goal I have is to teach her to be a critical thinker. Because when you question everything, then, everything is possible, actually. I think that is a huge part of it. So that's another goal I hope that we can kind of work on through this, because I want folks to know that, even if everyone in your bubble is telling you to conform and to, be who they want you to be, question it, and think about, why maybe you even think that you should be doing that, and make sure you're getting to a place that is really who you are, who you want to be, what you want to do, where you want to be.
And I'm of the opinion it should feel right to you as well. Like, it should be a place where you organically feel like you fit. If it gives you the heebie-jeebies or you feel uncomfortable, find the place that doesn't make you feel uncomfortable.
That's right.
Not that I don't think you should. I think you should step outside your comfort zone, but at the heart of the matter, you should feel like you should be there.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And also, there's there's so many things that we could touch on, but one of them is, I always say to find your people in whatever you're doing, because at the end of the day, if you're having problems with people that don't accept you for who you are, is really at the core of it, then you just got to find your people. And when you find your people, it's an amazing thing. And frankly, that's one of the reasons that has drawn me to nonprofit work as well, is that when I was in law school, I would find people that cared about, going into public interest, that wanted, I did a lot of internships at nonprofits, and I was like, oh, these are my people. These people believe we can do it. They're ready to do it. They're using their smarts for good, and I just was like, yes, this is who I want to be around. And so, yeah.
That's what drew me to you when we met in our unusual way, right? Like, my husband knew somebody who was working with you, and you were looking for legal jobs, having moved to Austin, and then they connected us. And I'm like, I was just fascinated meeting another lawyer who didn't see things the way some, what is it, white shoe law firm would see things, because I don't think white shoe law firms summarize either of our personalities very well.
Right, exactly.
And having a deep cultural identity. I think those two things, not wanting to be part of, an establishment that hasn't changed in hundreds of years, and having a cultural identity, really gives you a different perspective professionally and personally in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great point. And I feel like we have this deep connection from the beginning, and I was grateful for it. I'd never been able to pinpoint why, and you did that beautifully. That's right. And I think that's another reason why, I just hope that whoever's listening to this is finding that in this space, right? Is finding, okay, folks that are going about the plan, right? The plan is to do, many people get caught in this plan of like, now you go to this thing, and then you go to this school, and then you do that. And, I think that that's, it is what it is. And it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I think the good or bad comes where the next step is, how do you use it? And I think what we've found with each other is when you embrace who you really are, and you're not afraid of pursuing what you really want out of life and what you want to do with your life, that's where you find the magic of, okay, I have a skill set. I have certain, advantages, and I'm going to use them to do what I want in the world. And that, I think, is key. And I hope that people listening to this will be able to, through us, see that they can do that too. And whatever that looks like, it's a self journey, but it's a place you can get to with support and seeing other people do it.
I agree. And I think it's like if you have that example and you take that first step, the second step is easier. And then you start identifying the times where you limit yourself. But it's getting over that hurdle of changing your mindset to make these decisions that benefit you more. That is really the hard part to get past, right? Especially when you don't have a support system.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we hope that we can be that support system in a small way. We hope that we can pass on the supports that we've been blessed to have. And we hope that we can even build a community of people that can really support each other for a long time and get people on their journey to their full potential and everything that they really dream of being, and where they can feel like they can be their whole selves.
And I think you just succinctly explained why we decided to call ourselves the Uplift Pod, because we're here to help people lift themselves up and lift other people up.
Absolutely.